Why do government create projects that seem to be causing more problems than they intend to solve? Why are there projects in the city that seem to not match with what you want to get done in your neighborhood? Why does it appear that our tax monies go everywhere other than getting us what we need? How is it that we know what the problems are, but the solutions provided are totally something else? What control do you have as a resident of your place in creating a better quality of life for yourself? It appears you have no control. Can we change this? Hi, I am your host Sathya Sankaran, and we will take a deeper dive at this issue of local quality of life in today's episode of the OoruLabs Podcast. Subscribe and turn the notifications on if you haven't already, because there is content in the previous episode that will be useful tool for thinking about problem solving, and many of you seem to have missed it. Subsidiarity is a principle advocating that decisions and responsibility should be handled at the lowest possible level within a system, whether a government, organization, or society. This means that central authority should only intervene when local or smaller units are unable to effectively address a specific issue. In case of a society, it is the individual. In case of a government, it is a ward inside the city government. In case of an organization, it's the employee or the business unit. This appears common sense until you realize neither you nor your neighborhood or your ward actually calls the shots on planning, provisioning, and maintaining the public infrastructure around you. The government is the default owner of the public commons around you. They are responsible and accountable officially to use the tax monies to build and maintain the infrastructure. But a lot of us have created non-profit organizations to step up for the failure of the government in doing the job effectively. The way the government hires expertise, the range of functions they handle, it is impossible for it to develop enough expertise and keep pace with provisioning a better quality of life for all of us. At least that's the excuse we have now. But unlike India, where city level governments account for less than 3% of the total government spending, a staggering 51% of the government spending in China happens at the sub provincial levels. It's about 27% in the United States. Local governments in China also have much broader qualitative mandate. They are almost exclusively responsible for unemployment insurance, pensions, and things like that, subjects Indians generally associate with national government. However, this is an investment led decentralization that works for projects and not for political decentralization, which requires citizens to be a part of the decision making process. Let's hear from Ashwin Mahesh, who has been trying to solve this issue in various ways throughout his career.
If you talk to people about development, they'll tell you a bunch of things. They'll say some of the ideas in government are wrong. They'll say there's a shortage of capacity to implement even the right ideas. They'll tell you there isn't enough money. So there's you can sort of think of a sort of a list of explanations or excuses, depending on your point of view, that people will give you for why are things changing so slowly. Some people will even say things are not changing slowly; things are changing fast. But you can say South Korea and India were roughly similar 50 years ago in terms of and look where they are now. You can say other countries have made less impressive, but still more progress in the same time. And then the conversation moves to another type of explanation, which is to say, yeah, but India is different. India is big, India is, diverse, India is whatever, chaotic. I'm not even getting into the right and wrong of the explanation. You could ask, what is it going to take to get velocity into this? right? And I'm using that in a deliberate way. I'm saying we need to move in the right direction and we need to move fast. The people of India would like it if the country were developing faster. Let's just start at that.
What is the culture of countries like North America that allowed it to quickly ramp up development? It is the ability of the government to create methods like propositions that people can vote for on civic improvements and other social issues during the elections. That mechanism doesn't exist in India. It's also challenging to make election manifestos legally binding, as it becomes difficult to resist populist moves later after the elections. Nevertheless, Western countries have racked up a high level of per capita income that is becoming hard for many countries to catch up to. It allows for high level of capital flows for innovation and a higher tax to GDP ratio that allows government to focus on decentralized spending.
And then you say, okay, well, government has certain structures, some money, some capacity, and so on and so forth. And there's some things that government can do. Businesses can do some things. And potentially, people themselves can do some things. I think by and large, in the narrative about development, we have heard and seen only stuff about the first two. That is, we see a lot about what the government can do, is doing, etc. We hear stuff about what businesses are doing, including nowadays startup businesses and entrepreneurs, things like that. But we don't really have a narrative around what people are doing or people could be doing. This is ironic in two ways. The first way it's ironic is that, well, there are a lot more ordinary people than there are people in government or people in business. So if you really wanted to make things move fast, you would figure out how to leverage this much larger number of. But typically, the other irony is that this much larger number of people is usually presented as the problem. We have lots of people to take care of, is what you hear a lot. Nobody ever says, we have so many people who can do the taking care of.
So you're seeing them as a part of the problem rather than the solution.
Yeah. So in a sense, I have a way of saying this. I say we tend to count the people and then quickly discount them. I think that's the fundamental error. How do you get a lot more people to become drivers of development in one way or the other? And I think whatever the answer to how is, there's two things to consider. One is people have to have the capacity to make things happen, right? They should have reasonably good health. They should have some reasonably good knowledge and information, some access to capital. They have to be able to do it. They have to have capacity for change making in some way. And this means investing in the things that give them that capacity. The second thing that you need, even if people had that capacity, the government has to be sort of comfortable saying, okay, if they can change a few things, let them. Instead of saying, oh, no. Change has to be decided, the direction of change, the speed of change, all of that has to be decided by us in government. And others only get to participate afterwards. So if you take that view, you'll slow it down. I think that's where we are. And in fact, the state, at some level, as it became asymmetrically more powerful than market and citizens, people in politics started competing to grab that power.
But it's not about government and its power to determine our future. Decentralization via the Constitution is just one way to achieve subsidiarity. The 74th Amendment, called the Nagarpalika Act, created a Schedule 12 in the Constitution with a list of actions that the urban local bodies like a municipal corporation should do. This remains on paper. As of 2023, more than 1,400 city municipal corporations were without an elected council, which included large cities like Bengaluru, Mumbai, and Chennai. But remember, subsidiarity applies to all kinds of collectives like society and businesses as well. Jonathan Haidt wrote in The Atlantic, when Alexis Henry Tocqueville, a philosopher and a former minister of Europe and Foreign Foreign Affairs of France toured the United States in the 1830s. He was impressed by the American habit of forming voluntary associations to fix local problems rather than waiting for kings or nobles to act as the Europeans would do. That habit is still with us, he says. So, how should we imagine this development with people involved in India? What prevents it? Here is Ashwin again.
Thinking that the state itself is going to allow or enable that to happen is not is that's just wishful, because they're quite comfortable with the current arrangement. It suits those who are in the state. But it's a huge obstacle to what I would call development. We have to think of development as a kind of co-equal or a peer-to-peer relationship between state, market, and society. And this is what you have in developed countries, right? And instinctively we understand this. If you say, oh, China is so developed, people will say, yeah, but they don't have democracy. What exactly do they mean about that? When they say, yeah, but they don't have democracy, what they mean is they don't have this peer-to-peer relationship between society and the state. Therefore, that definition of development is incomplete. Citizens being able to express themselves in many ways, and Sarkar being competent and collaborative. These are pieces of the jigsaw puzzle of development. I'm not even saying that these things cause development. I'm saying having that co-equal relationship is development. And that's an important difference. The day you have that equal relationship, you will be all right. Because everything else will happen more or less logically from there. So now we come to the situation of say, how are we going to get there? Right? I mean, if one of the three has the upper hand now, it doesn't suit them to try to reset. I remember when I first got involved with a bunch of people over here in cleaning this lake stuff here, right, in Puttanalli. One of the first questions we had from BBMP was, who the hell are you and what are you doing? It was a very ironic question because the person asking it was in charge of keeping the lake clean. So I asked him, who are you and what do you do? And he was quite sheepish about it. He said, I am the engineer in charge of the lake. Like, well, clearly you're not doing a good job. The lake is not what it should be. So what have you been doing? And then he starts saying, oh, we don't have budgets, we don't have staff, we don't have this or that. And that's actually a more co-equal conversation. Because at that point you say, okay, let's talk about how we can get a budget. Let's talk about how we can get more staff assigned to this kind of thing. That's a problem we can both work on together. But the expectation for both of us should be that the lake should be clean. It cannot be that I have one expectation and he doesn't have that expectation and he has an explanation instead of an expectation. So I think we need to come to a common expectation between citizens and the state.
Citizens and collectives are owners of the place. We live, work, shop, and entertain ourselves in our neighborhoods. What would get us to be involved in our neighborhood? Our involvement increases the number of problem-solving people and allows a healthier interaction with the government. Even in cases of government failure due to low capacity, financial mismanagement, lack of knowledge and corruption, it allows the communities to avail of services from the non-profit organizations that have stepped in to fill the gap. Here is Ashwin again on the roadmap to citizen-driven change.
And when I say citizens, by extension, I mean businesses and other private entities as well. And we need to say, what can each of us do to make that happen? That's not so difficult. You remember when we did the neighborhood improvement challenge about 10 years ago, a bunch of different people sent proposals to say, we want to do this in our neighborhood. And will you give money to do that? And there was a CSR grant from which people were given money. Right? Nearly 100 people applied and about 10 people were given, 8 or 10 people were given money. The interesting thing to me was that 100 people applied. And you can say, well, because they were being offered financial support for an idea in their own neighborhoods, they applied. Yeah, but they applied. Right? The government could say, well, we won't give money, but you can come and give an idea and we'll consider that too. The top 10 ideas will be implemented. The government could do that too, just as easily as a corporation doing that with its CSR money. So I think the the thing that was different to my mind about a challenge like that was essentially what you need is the momentum of somebody saying, this can be done, here's how it can be done, let's do it. You need that. The state capacity failure is, it may be, you might have a nonprofit organization trying to address it in some way. But the actual perception of that failure is not with the nonprofit organization, it is with the citizen. I feel my road is not okay. I feel whatever, the footpath is not okay, the lake is not okay, the power supply is not okay. I feel, right? As an individual resident in a neighborhood, I feel that. Now, if some NGO comes along and says, I'll work with the municipality to make this better, somebody goes to the municipality and says, oh, we can help design these intersections. So, fine. Now, the municipality might say, oh, why not? Somebody's coming and saying, with our money, we'll help you do something that you're supposed to do anyway with your own money. But you're not doing it, so we'll help you anyway. And yeah, every once in a while, the municipality will say yes to that. Similar things happen in other departments as well. I'm saying it's not the money, actually, that enables this to happen. Set aside the money for a moment. The thing is, there is, these three words that sort of have been resonating recently, right? Purpose, persistence, and proximity. Right? That somebody who cares about a local area is persistent in caring about it and purposeful in going and saying, let's do something about it. The ideal is that ordinary citizens self-mobilize themselves and self-express themselves to say what they want, and they provide inputs as to how to do that. They work with their elected representatives and the bureaucracy to make things happen. Let's say that there are gaps in what actually is happening. Right. So then the question is, along comes somebody. And then somebody says, I can fill the gap. But they're not actually filling the gap. They're doing something else.
What is that?
They're actually providing the service. The gap is in the ability to express yourself and be able to work constructively with your representative and your bureaucracy. That is the gap. The delivery of the road and the delivery of the water supply and all of that stuff, that is not the gap. That is the consequence of the first gap. If I had the ability to work strongly with my elected representative and the bureaucracy, there wouldn't be this gap in supply. In fact, wherever, and you know this too, wherever citizens have self-mobilized to go to the municipality and say, I want this, and I'm willing to work with you to make some of this happen, in a number of cases that does happen. Yeah. The gap is in the lack of an engaging conversation between those who are governed and those who govern. That's the gap. That's the only gap. There's no other gap. Everything else is a consequence of that. These people could be ordinary citizens, they could be academics, they could be businesses, they could be anybody. But essentially, a more public and bi-directional conversation between the state and the others. People respond to their defaults. If there is a tradition or if there's a custom of continuously engaging, then that's what they'll do. If there isn't a custom of continuously engaging, then they won't. So in a sense, you have to seed it. There's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. You want people to engage more, but the problem is that they are not engaging. So what do you do to get them to engage more? That's the question. That's what the innovation should be about. The innovation should be about saying, my innovation is to get more people to engage. So this means different things for different people. If you are a nonprofit in the water space, then you will come to the technical solutions, the managerial solutions, and all those kinds of things. But your primary responsibility is to help people have that conversation about water with their bureaucracy and with their elected representatives. That's the primary responsibility. The technical stuff is another layer. But the primary responsibility is to enable this conversation in that sector. Likewise, in mobility and so on and so forth. This doesn't stop you from going and telling the government what should be done. But ideally, what you want to do is to enable more people to go and tell the government what should be done. Right? So once we say that's what we want to do, now the question is, how can we get that to happen? There are certain levers which if we use, one can begin to mimic this. And the reason to sort of get this going is what I said, that people respond to their defaults. If they see this happening around them, they'll do it. Right? So what do you want to do? You want to say, oh, this thing that I want people to do often, I have to make it happen the first time. Right? It may be a one-off, it may be a thing, but I have to make it happen the first time. And you might say, okay, what does it take to make it happen the first time? Right? Next making is very small, right? Take some small space, improve it a little bit, make it a playground, make it a park, whatever. You can do that for a couple of lakhs. Even if you do it with some more serious infrastructure, it won't cost more than 5 or 10 lakhs to do some small placement thing. Now you could say, let's say you are a company with a CSR grant or a foundation or kind of thing. Or even just a neighborhood group that can rustle up a couple of lakhs. I mean, surely in Bangalore, many neighborhood groups can easily rustle up a couple of lakhs. So you ought to be able to say, well, here's the thing that needs to be fixed. It only costs a couple of lakhs to fix it. Let 10 of us put 20,000 bucks into it and get it done. Right? Now, what you need is that model to be in place, that arrangement to be in place. Or you could be in a company or a foundation and say, well, I have 50 lakhs. What can I do with 50 lakhs? If the smart thing to do with 50 lakhs is not find one project in which it can be spent powerfully. Smart thing to do with 50 lakhs is to give it to 25 communities to do placemaking in that place. Right? Because why? Because in the act of getting 25 communities to do something, you are essentially saying, I'm trying to seed the model that actually needs to be in place. The one good project is not going to solve that problem. The one good problem solves the symptom. It doesn't solve the disease. Right? So in a sense, if you're going to provide the medicine, it has to be for the disease, not for the symptom. You and I are non-profits. We are just residents in the city. And if we contribute our time, if we contribute our labor, if we contribute our minds, there are some things that we can do for the good of the neighborhood. And we do it voluntarily and freely. In a sense, if you start thinking of yourself as the non-profit, then you can see the model much better, because that aligns much better with the model for democracy itself. Then it's much easier to say, oh, the non-profits too have to do this, which is why I've been saying for some time now, we're better off going with CBOs than with NGOs. A community-based organization, a citizens group, is actually a better bet for the future than a non-profit technical organization that provides solutions. That can be contracted. In fact, what you can do is to say, let's take that technical capability and figure out a way to offer that technical capability to lots of CBOs. If you're going to give money, give to a CBO and let them contract any services that they want. So you can do NIP round 2 in scale if you want to. You can give money. In fact, there's another idea, right? That sometimes I talk about this, which is to say, if you want to give money to a neighborhood, a lot of people will say, sir, we have to do this in our spare time. We don't have the bandwidth to go engage with the government.
Right.
And all that. Very good. For 25,000 bucks a month or 35,000 bucks a month, you can hire a guy and say, this guy is now full-time. His only job is neighborhood improvement by engaging with whoever is in government and whoever is in service delivery to go and do more and more and more, day in and day out. That's all he needs to do. For 30, 40,000 bucks a month, you can achieve that.
On behalf of the CBO.
Yeah, on behalf of the CBO. In fact, the CBO, like, Frank, I live in a community of 2,000 flats. To come up with 30,000 rupees for a guy is 15 rupees a flat. I'm saying it's so trivial if you actually wanted to get this model going. And I think it's a better model to go with, because now you got a guy, he's full-time. He doesn't have all these constraints of I don't have time, I have to do it, between my child's breakfast and my wife's dinner. You don't have to do all that stuff. You can just do it, but that's all you're set out to do. So that's one model. Right. You do NIP 2.0, you do, neighborhood improvement professional rather than neighborhood improvement challenge, right? That's a second model. The third model is this, what I said. Gather some NGO and say, fine, I will give you money, but you have to find 15 communities for which you'll do this. And you have to do it nimbly. You have to value nimbleness. You have to value nimbleness and numbers. There are lots of people doing quick things quickly. So the other thing is, a lot of people will say, I have an idea. It'll take 6 months to do this thing. And I'll get it, I'll detail it, I'll figure out all the steps, blah, 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 and all the steps. I think 70% of a lot of projects can be done in 1/10 of the time. There's an 80-20 rule in projects too, that you can get 80% of the value of a project in 20% of the time and 20% of the effort in many projects.
Neighborhoods of the future is a concept that allows citizen-based organizations to own issues in their local area, ask for help in structuring the ideas, putting it together, and availing of services from non-profits and businesses who will deliver it to you. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next episode.